I'm pleased to be with everyone this evening, and I'm hoping most of the country is warmer here than balmy Manitoba, but looking through the sort of weather network, it looks like it's pretty frigid everywhere, so maybe that's good for my numbers. People will actually be inside tonight listening to our podcast. So one more time, quick thank you to Canadian Moneysaver for putting this series together and giving us the opportunity to get together and learn from one another. Before I start here, I just wanted to quickly show everyone that I have a disclaimer, and I can't be sued when my penny stock recommendations don't quite turn out the way I said they would. No, I'm just kidding. I don't recommend penny stocks, but in all seriousness, I'm just a business teacher who gets an unusual amount of happiness from reading business and finance books. I don't have 13 letters after my name. I don't have any official credentials when it comes to personal finance, and I'm not a chartered accountant or anything like that. So my advice would be, don't just take my word for it. Ask someone smarter than me and do some reading on your own. So who am I? Lana mentioned a little bit. You can find me at My University Money, Young and Thrifty. You can also obviously find me writing at Canadian Moneysaver. You might recognize my random ramblings or the sound of my voice tonight from my podcast, The More Money for Beer and Textbooks podcast. It's a cool gig, so go ahead and check that out. And like I said, I teach humanities at a small rural school in Manitoba, and so the good news is if everyone stays quiet tonight, and I just get sort of the sense that there's not too many people paying attention, everyone's just on their cell phone, I'll feel right at home as a high school teacher. So moving on, I should admit right up front that I'm not a PowerPoint graphics design guru, so hopefully I threw this together and it's not offensive to your eyes. I think it gets the point across, but if it looks like one of my grade 9 students did it, I asked them to take a look at it today and they said, oh no, we're way better than that. So I'm not even on the grade 9 level of PowerPoint design, so hopefully, like I said, you can concentrate on some of the information behind it. So as we start tonight, I think it's gonna go better. I know that some of you have tuned into other webinars here at Canadian Money Sense. There's been not a lot of back and forth. I would think it's really cool if people do throw some questions at me. And I think the way we're going to do that, I was talking to Lana earlier, and we've got a chat box over here. I just sent everyone a message. And if you want to throw a message up there to me, if it's sort of on point and on what I'm talking about, I'll answer it. If we're pressed for time and I got to keep rolling, I might just have to scroll through. But I'd really like to get some back and forth going. If something I've said doesn't make sense, or if you want to expand in a certain area, sort of just trying to feel out where the audience is in terms of what people know, what they've already read about, that sort of thing. So use the chat box if you want to talk to me. I've chosen the title of How to Save Your Way to an Early Retirement because it sounded good, and that's basically the only reason why. I didn't really know what to call what I wanted to talk about. Saving for an early retirement and investing my way to an early retirement is a goal I have. I don't think it's a goal everyone should have. It just depends on sort of what you want out of life, what your sort of ideals are. For example, my fiance, I fully believe that she'll teach school till she's 65 or 70. They'll have to carry her out of there because she loves it every day. She wakes up first day of spring break or summer holidays and says, gosh, I wish I could go into school today. That's not me. I like my job. I like teaching, but I also like my freedom. So that's sort of where I'm coming from on this. But what we're going to talk about tonight and covering some of the fundamentals and stuff is sort of it's things that can be applied to any personal finance situation. So just solid things that I'm hoping that even if you sort of consider yourself well versed in personal finance, you can get at least one or two really actionable points that you can put to use right away from the webinar this evening. So Keeping It 100 is a segment on the new Larry Wilmore Nightly Show, if anyone has checked that out. And in the spirit of keeping it 100, I should admit right up front that I am not currently retired. So when I say early retirement's a great thing, I guess what I'm saying is I believe the early retirement's a great thing. Everything I've experienced up till now looks like a great deal. But in this case, do as I say, not as I've done. That being said, I am on course for an early retirement. My plan is currently being met. And I should be also right up front in saying that you know, having a defined pension plan definitely helps with an early retirement. And so in the past, when I've sort of done public things and I talk to different people in public forums, they get quite what I believe irrationally angry at me for having a defined benefit plan. I think it's a great deal. I'm very thankful for it, but to not include it as part of my plan wouldn't really make sense because it's for me. So take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, apply it to your situation, but obviously that's part of it. I should also mention to everyone that if you would like to ask a question through Twitter, you can send it to Canadian Moneysaver, so that's CDN Moneysaver, and they'll throw it up to me here on my little chat screen. So if you're more comfortable doing that than just typing it into the chat section, you can go ahead and send it over to Twitter. When we're talking about early retirement, I really like Jonathan Chevreau's come up with the term findependence, and I think a lot of people have been using it now. And I really like that term because when I say a young retirement, I sort of tongue-in-cheek put the picture up on the screen there of the stereotype of two chairs looking out at the ocean. And that'd be great. I mean, that looks good, don't get me wrong. But I think what I ultimately want is personal freedom. And I want that more than material goods or luxury-themed experiences, and I don't say that lightly because material goods and luxury-themed experiences are awesome. I'm going to get married here in a month and a half in Mexico, and that is you know, one of the only luxury-themed experiences I've ever had. I fully expect it to be great, and so I don't say it lightly when I say I want that sort of personal freedom of independence earlier than I think most people do. You know, do you want it more than you want a brand new car? Do you want it more than you want an extra 1,000 square feet on your house? Those are decisions you want to make. And again, I want to sort of drive home the point that I don't believe that the choices I'm making are any better than the person that wants to work a couple extra years to be able to afford the extra 1,000 square feet on their house. I merely want to awaken people to the concept that they are making a choice one way or the other. I find that a lot of us in the personal finance realm, we tend to get tied up in the details and the minutiae of personal finance. We talk about comparing hundredths of a point on our index ETFs or sort of the perfect percentage of Canadian-based equities to have in our portfolio given the market circumstances at the time. And we can sometimes you know, let the major life experiences that will really affect us, they sort of fade into the background and we don't give them as much thought as perhaps we should. And these big picture scenarios can completely disrupt any financial plan, sort of no matter how well we've sort of conceived our specific portfolio. And I joke about reading 3 books on dividend investing and then I joked at the bottom there, I said, who wants to read about budgeting? You get rich by knowing about investment returns. And this is a really unique phenomenon to me that I think I notice a lot amongst younger people that read personal finance blogs. And I know a lot of people out there that can talk for hours about portfolio construction and, you know, value investing versus dividend investing and if anyone can really beat the market and if hedge funds are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. However, they don't actually have any money to invest with. It's a really weird phenomenon in that you know, people that understand how to save but aren't really sure how to invest and just stick in bonds, basic bonds, and sort of just save their wealth, they end up doing better over time than these people that have all these books worth of investment knowledge. But yet they're sort of penny wise, pound foolish, to use a bit of a dated term. And when you're not putting the thought into these big picture scenarios, they can sort of jump up and bite you. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And again, I figure this applies to someone who's looking at early retirement, as well as someone who is, you know, just looking to become financially literate and financially healthy in life. So picking your partner, this continues to be one of the most important life decisions that anyone makes, and that is equally true for your finance. I was sort of shocked. I was quickly doing a quick Google here before I started the webinar a couple days ago, and the Globe and Mail reported that 41% of marriages will end in divorce before the 30th year of marriage. And that's pretty scary to me as a guy who's contemplating, well, not contemplating, committed to getting married here in the next few weeks. And in addition to that, I've done quite a bit of personal finance reading, because that's what you do when you're a teacher in a rural small town and you have long, cold nights. And so in the U.S., there was a survey done, and I couldn't find a similar one for in Canada. But in the book, The Millionaire Mind, you can find the stat that, well, you can see it on the page there. But basically, the majority of millionaires are married people, and they've been married for a long time. And he ends the chapter by saying, in essence, why are millionaires millionaires? Because they made the right decisions concerning several issues in their life, and one of these is the choice of spouse. And I don't think it can be underrated, or overstated, I should say, just how important this picking the right partner is. And I mean, with Valentine's Day right around the corner, perhaps this isn't the most romantic sentiment, that you should be considering finances when picking a partner. You know, we've got all these different ideas of romance out there in the world, and very few include, you know, checking accounts. And I'm certainly not advocating that you should choose a life partner based on the paycheck. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying instead, and to be honest, I've seen very few marriages where that is the sole issue that causes a divorce. But what I do see cause a lot of stress in many relationships is when people have different ideas about money and different values about money, spending versus saving, what their financial goals are, what sort of lifestyle they want to live. You know, one person wants to travel, another person wants those marble kitchens with brand new cabinets every few years. And if you have differing and competing sort of paradigms for what you're going to do with your money, that's not going to end well, and it's going to put a lot of stress on things, because ultimately, you know, money is just a tool to pursue what you want in life. And if you're pursuing sort of these two different goals, things aren't going to work well. So, you know, moving on, I think that's pretty self-explanatory, and I guess for most of us on the webinar, if you've already picked a partner, hopefully you picked the right one. Statistically, many of us haven't, which is bad news, and hopefully everyone cures that with, you know, a Valentine's Day to remember here in a couple days. So home is where the heart is, increasingly where our net worth is. I'm always floored when I talk to people, and they know that I have something to do with money. They know I have a book or whatever, and they take great pains to tell me my house is the best investment I ever made, and they try their damnedest to sound quite wise. And I just shake my head. I try not to correct them, because then you know, you're the jerk in the room. But I sort of shake my head, because it just reveals how little you actually understand about investments if you truly believe your home is the best investment you've ever made. There's very, very, very few circumstances where that's the case, and I think the recent sort of reality in Canada, where we've had these escalating housing prices on a historical scale for the last 15 years, they've sort of blinded people to a lot of reality. And you know, I don't really understand the concept of even counting your house and your net worth unless you plan on downsizing at some point, and then it makes sense that it would generate wealth for you. But otherwise, your house is just a place you're going to be putting your head at night. So that being said, or sort of if you believe in that paradigm, then you shouldn't really be counting your house in your net worth. What it does do for you is it takes away from it builds your positive cash flow up, obviously, because you don't have to pay rent after a certain point in your life. Or, you know, if you're trying to pursue an early retirement, then you don't have that expense to worry about, and that's certainly great. I actually own a house, but I don't think that everyone should, and I think far fewer of us should than currently is the case. We sort of have a cult of home ownership in Canada, where you're not considered a real adult until you own a home, and I just don't understand that. And I think one of the best guys that spoke on this is Pre Banerjee, and he's got some really great stuff out there, essentially talking about why renting is not a bad option right now, especially in Canada's major urban centers. I don't really understand the rationale behind paying as much as some of us young people are for housing, and only with the goal of moving in 5 years. If you look at closing costs and you look at all these various expenses that go with owning a home, it's just not worth it. It's not conducive to building wealth. And if you're looking to retire early, it's just not going to work, because with these crippling mortgage payments you're making, you're just not going to have much left over for your savings and your investing account. You can know all the investing knowledge in the world, but if you've got a huge mortgage on your back, that's not really going to help you a whole lot, and you've killed your career flexibility in a lot of ways by putting yourself in that home. If you're looking to pursue a career in a specific field, then you may have to move in order to get a position, and again, then you're constantly incurring these churning costs of buying a new house. And I think that renting really gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of pursuing that. If you want to pursue entrepreneurship opportunities, or putting some extra time in a market that maybe you hadn't considered before. And owning a home is no picnic, as many of you no doubt know that own homes. The time and the financial commitment that it takes to upkeep a house is inevitably going to take away from your ability to earn and save and research investments, if that's your thing. And so I think like this cult of home ownership, if you're going to pursue an early retirement, or you sort of just have long-term wealth building plans, you really need to look hard on that decision. I know interest rates are low right now, and they're probably about to get lower, but I'm still not certain that it's a great plan. If you decide that buying a house is right for you, I recommend a recent book that came out called Wealthing Like Rabbits by a guy named Robert Brown. And he has a great chapter that is quite unique, and he illustrates sort of the choices that we make when it comes to houses using these two plumbers that I'm not exactly sure where they're inspired by, but their names are Mario and Luigi. And these two plumbers, these two brothers, who earn the same income and, of course, live quite similar lives aside from the house that they buy. And the chapter goes through and shows how their housing choices have impacted their lives, and includes sort of brilliant insights like, doesn't coffee taste better off of a marble counter? And I sort of identify with that, and I think that it's sort of the untold personal finance story in Canada. You can budget all you want, but if your mortgage payment eats up 50% of your paycheck, all the budgeting in the world isn't going to make you rich. And in the same vein, in terms of saving money on your living costs, one underrated strategy I consistently push for with young people to get some traction is to look to rural areas and smaller cities across Canada. It's much easier to get a grip on the housing ladder in terms of sort of what you're going to pay for a house. When I tell people for Toronto what I paid for my house, their response is, you can't even get a parking spot for that in downtown Toronto. And they're not exaggerating by very much. But you can move to where the jobs are, which increasingly are in many of Canada's western small towns. And there's a lot less of a keeping up with the Joneses mentality in rural areas, in my experience, which I think is pretty substantial. I've lived in rural areas most of my life. And there's just a cheaper cost of living all the way around. I always use the example of if you go down to the local coffee shop in my small town, you can get a bottomless cup of coffee for $1. You compare that to the classic latte a day personal finance story, and it doesn't take long to add up pretty quickly. So moving on, you've heard my spiel on houses now, so it wouldn't be a complete personal finance spiel without a look at cars. And again, a lot of this stuff is fairly common sense, but if you haven't sort of come to a value statement yet about vehicles in your life, The Millionaire Teacher by Andrew Lamb, which I obviously like for obvious reasons, says if you can go through life without losing money on cars, you're going to have a huge advantage. And Andrew learned this while working in a garage with the shop owner of the garage, who was a millionaire himself. And again, I don't think people quite understand just how quickly many vehicles devalue. And so if you're out there constantly buying, every 4 or 5 years, buying a new vehicle, one of the teachers that I work with, they sold their 6-year-old truck and bought a new truck last year. And so when I asked them, just sort of off the cuff, why they chose to do that, they responded, well, I got to sell it while it still has some value. And this is just amazing. This just amazed me that this is a math teacher, by the way. that the math behind depreciation led them to the conclusion they should sell at the height of their vehicle's depreciation just so they could get something for it in order to buy a brand new vehicle that would then begin depreciating. It's amazing how many people do it, though, especially with all these 0% loans that they're handing out these days. And I also thought it was interesting, the Millionaire Mind by Thomas Stanley. He points out that the most common car driven by millionaires is a Toyota sedan. And this sort of is in sync with what Halam was saying in his book, where, look, buy a decent, fuel-efficient car. I drive an Elantra. I'm not saying that it's it's going to win many street racing events, but it gets me from A to B, and ultimately that's what I want in a car. But I want to add this to the traditional car talk. Preet Banerjee, who's you've heard me mention him a couple times now, he's a car guy. In fact, he was a professional race car driver for a brief period in his life, which is kind of a cool thing to be able to say, I think. And anyhow, he talks about vehicles, and he says all these people go out and spend all this money on luxury cars and cars that have great horsepower and clock amazing 0 to 60 times, but they can't ever do what the car can do. They drive in urban environments. They're still just stopping at 15 stoplights on the way to work every morning, and they very rarely get out and open it up. So his solution was drive the beater, the Toyota sedan that millionaires drive, and buy that, drive it during the week and suffer through it. And if you want, you can rent brilliant essentially race cars. You can rent time at a racetrack. You can rent time, with a Ferrari or a BMW, and you can put the insurance on it in case of a worst case scenario. And while those rental rates for a weekend might look insane, it's certainly less insane than paying huge monthly payments month in and month out for a car that you only use to drive from A to B. So I think that's an interesting suggestion to sort of satisfy both the primal instincts of guys that just want to be car guys and drive fast, and at the same time satisfy the personal finance side of things. As far as young people go, car dealerships love us, especially if you just graduated from college or university. They're going to throw all sorts of deals at you because they want to create that brand loyalty, and it's really easy to convince yourself that you're just treating yourself. If anyone is a Parks and Recreation fan here, they might get the reference. So sorry, I just got a quick question here. I'm going to jump to that and then go back to young people buying cars. So Calvin asked, do you think home ownership is a hedge against inflation? And okay, we got two questions coming. I like this. This is good. A little bit of engaging interaction. My students could learn from the Canadian Moneysaver world. So Kelvin asked, do you think housing ownership is a hedge against inflation? It is. It is a hedge against inflation. In my opinion, a better hedge against inflation is either a smaller home or a massive investment portfolio, because we know that in times of inflation and at all times, a well-diversified portfolio of equities is going to outperform real estate. It hasn't only over select 3 and 4 year periods, but overall it's not even close right now in Canada or the USA. So it is a bit of a hedge against inflation, especially if you're looking at retirement. I don't advocate going into retirement with a mortgage on your back. So hopefully that answers your question a little bit there, Kelvin. They continue on. Can you elaborate how someone who rents a home versus someone who buys a place is worse off in 5 years? Renting is like throwing money out the window. At least the person who purchases something can sell in 5 years. This is a great point. This is a perfect representation of the Canadian ideal, and someone who probably should have a second career selling homes. And that's actually not true. So can you explain to me the math behind you get a massive rental payment or massive mortgage payment that the bank will lend you, 40% of whatever you take home, and they're gonna pay that off. Your first, you get a 25 or 30-year mortgage. Your first 5 years of payments, 90% plus of that payment is going to interest payments. So you're not building any equity. And the idea that at least the person who purchased something can sell something in 5 years, that's true. They will have some equity, and given the last 15 years in Canada, they've probably seen their investment increase. But as we all know, sort of past results cannot predict future performance. So if you think that housing market is going to continue going through the roof. I know some really smart people that would disagree with you. That being said, those people have been disagreeing for a long time now. So maybe you're right. Maybe housing will go up forever in Canada. It has no precedent to do that in the world. And the 5-year window, most of your profit or most of the equity you've built up with that, 5 to 10% in mortgage payments you're paying, along with your down payment, that's going to be eaten up in closing costs on the front end and the back end if you've only owned for 5 years. So I understand the sentiment and that renting is throwing away money, but that rent payment, chances are, is going to be quite a lot smaller than your mortgage payment, especially if you can suck it up with some roommates. And if you invest the difference in equities for the long term, you're going to be further ahead. The math is just too strong. I feel pretty confident in saying that. We got one more housing comment, and then perhaps we will move on here from housing. Canadians love housing-related conversations. I'm always sort of amazed by that. So Eugene says, maybe the house is, quote, the best investment to cover the end years of retirement when home care is no longer an option. Sale of the house will cover the cost of a retirement home, and a house is also a forced saving. And I think, actually, Eugene, that is the one piece that makes the most sense for Canadians, is that a mortgage payment, the threat of losing your home, is enough motivation to save. And that's probably the greatest advantage that I believe someone who owns a home has. Now, if we could apply that same discipline to taking the difference between our modest rent payment and the mortgage payment, at that point we could invest it, like I said, and if you could have the same discipline, I understand that's a rare thing sometimes, you'd be much further ahead. But I do get the point of a forced saving, and the retirement home, I hear you on that. Going into retirement with a mortgage, I think it is crippling for a lot of people, and we're seeing it more and more often. So if you pay off your home before you retire, again, that's an expense line that you no longer need, and sort of the monthly income you need to live a decent lifestyle is lower. So it's not a bad investment in that way. I think especially for young people in urban areas right now, it really doesn't make sense to buy a home, in my opinion. It's just not worth the pros and cons list, the forced savings, and looking at a retirement home, hopefully not for a long time if you're a young person. It's just not worth the sort of rush to get into a home where you're sacrificing all your retirement savings, you're sacrificing a lot of different career opportunities. So we'll move on from the housing. It's a great argument. We could probably talk about that on a podcast all on its own. I know that sort of the back and forth on that issue can get pretty passionate with some people. I know my dad and I disagree on this frequently, because he thinks, oh, stocks, those can go up and down, but my house is something I can touch and feel, and there's certainly something to that security. But moving back to vehicles and young people real quick here, as we wrap the vehicle idea, if you start making monthly payments, even at 0% interest, that car is depreciating, or even more so if it's a truck or a luxury vehicle, and you've lost the chance for compounded savings. If you plan on retiring early, you're already cutting that investment window for your riskiest investments by quite a bit. Because if you're going into, depending on what most people consider early retirement, but if you're looking at like between 45, 55, 60, somewhere in there, your sort of window to be in a 90 to 100% equities portfolio it's pretty small. You should start to get some bond and some sort of fixed savings part of your portfolio. Most people would agree with that as you move forward and as you get closer to when you want to start drawing down or generating an income with your portfolio. And you've lost a real chance there in your early 20s or even late teens in some cases to start those compound savings early. And of course, that's when you usually throw up the compound savings chart that only goes up and makes everyone rich. So moving on. So but budgeting, yada yada yada, because no one wants to hear this in the webinar. Everyone wants the sexy stuff. What's the magic bullet for picking an investment? How do I reach those 2 lawn chairs at 45? There's got to be a way. Sort of what side job are you doing that allows you to do that? And like I said, it continues to amaze me how few people budget. I threw 3 examples out there with the YNAB and the Mint and the Home Builder. In Canada at this point, I don't think there's any sort of excuse left when it comes to budgeting. There are so many great tools at your disposal in order to sort of plan your budget and decide what your priorities are, because ultimately that's what budgeting comes down to. I joke around in my book that when young people hear the word budgeting, they immediately jump to, this is something for old people and it's boring and who makes money budgeting. And really, it's super easy and it will help. Even just recording what you've spent in the last month. I'm much more successful with budgeting than I am controlling my nutrient intake. I stay away from the word dieting because that's got all sort of negative connotations, but I know that it's the exact same feeling of accountability when you start recording what you're doing, what you're putting in your body in terms of food. You start making better choices almost overnight because somehow you're more accountable to yourself now. And the same is true of the budget. And just like when you're thinking about what you should be eating, the parallels are just so obvious. It doesn't mean you can never ever have a piece of chocolate cake or a craft beer. It just means, look, everything's got some calories in it, and you've got to make those trade-offs. Do you want to go for, add an extra 2 miles to your run? Do you want to, have that supper or have that vegetable for supper instead of the carb on your plate? And it's just a question of trade-offs. What do you like most? If you love chocolate cake and you want to eat it once a week even, you can make that work in your nutrition plan. Just like, if you are a huge sports fan and you want season tickets, you can make that work in your budget. Sometimes, admittedly, it depends on your income. But basically, if you want to decide sort of what are your priorities, what do you really have the most fun doing, you can usually, in my experience, for most Canadians, fit that in somewhere in your budget. You just can't do everything. There's a girl named Paula Pant who writes a blog out of the States. It's called Afford Anything. And her idea is that you can afford anything, just not everything. And I think that's sort of a valuable idea. I personally am not a huge fan of pushing these things that really have a social sort of toll. I know some people go with like all cash budgets and they take really drastic measures where they're putting all their money in envelopes or jars or whatever the case may be, and I guess that works for some people. It's not my style. I find it's really hard for people to stick with it when they go to pay for this or that and they got to pull out an envelope and people are laughing at them, and it's just, there's nothing wrong with it. It will work. I just find it hard, and with the apps that they have now and the different cloud-based apps that they have where you can simply just log into your app, throw down what you've just paid, and it's going to sort of keep track of it for you. I don't really understand the need for some of that other stuff. So take it for what you will. That's sort of my short and sweet spiel on budgeting. We've got a great interactive budget if you're a young person at myuniversitymoney.com. Carrie Taylor has a great one over at squawkfox.ca. Mint's got some interactive budget features like I talked about, and like I said, it's honestly at this point just a question of how bad do you really want that financial independence, or how bad do you want that financial goal you've set for yourself, and I mean, that'll determine how much attention you pay to your budget. I'm going to get off my soapbox about budgeting because, like I said, no one really wanted to hear about it because everyone knows it's something they should do, and they'll get around to it in their own time, I think, when the motivation gets to them. So some sort of controversial wealth building advice that I throw out there, and I take a lot of flack for it sometimes, especially given the job that I have, is that not everyone should go to university. And I usually get like an audible gasp in a room of parents when I say, university is not always a very good idea for a lot of people. And perhaps we send a few too many people to university as it is. And everyone goes, oh my God, you're telling my child not to go to university, like what a monster you are. And I just look at the math. The average degree no longer has a direct impact on your job. I get emails all the time at our two blogs that skew to a younger demographic. I get emails from architects, from young lawyers, people who have these really high professional degrees, and there's just no market for them. They don't want to leave the urban environment that all their friends are in, and there's simply no jobs for them where they are, much to their chagrin, because they've been sold this bill of goods by universities that say, just stick with us and work hard, and their marketing teams are paid gazillions of dollars to come up with snappy ways to get your attention, and they're quite good at it. Of course, by the time you're confronting a job reality, by the time you're sort of confronting that job reality, the university's got what they came for, and unfortunately you're left with oftentimes a debt, especially if you move to go to school, which I did. I moved from a rural area. There was no post-secondary options close to me, and it was the time of my life. So this is sort of a tug of war between my heart and my brain on this, because living at home and going to school is obviously a way to save some cash. But on the other hand, I just had so many positive life experiences moving away from home and going to university. So, do you want a $28,000 worth of ball and chain to start life with? If you're looking to retire early and you're now 22 or 23 or perhaps only 20 or 21, and you've got 28 grand worth of ball and chain on you, and you start solid savings habits and solid debt pay downs, and you're budgeting, you're making all the right decisions, it's still going to take you 2 or 3 years minimum to pay down that student debt. So now you're perhaps 26, 27, 28, 29. Now all of a sudden your chance for all that compound, long-term compounding, if you want to retire early, it's quickly sort of that window's closing. But I mean, it's a trade-off thing. If you're going to be a doctor, obviously, or you have it in your head you're going to be an absolutely brilliant lawyer, and that's who you are in life. I'm not saying don't go to university. I'm just saying we got to do a better job of looking at post-secondary education from a wealth benefit perspective, from a credential perspective. And if you feel that this is really your life mission to do this, and you need that credential to do it, then go ahead. But otherwise, I mean, people say, "Oh, I'm going to university to find myself," or "Oh, you never waste a year if you're going to school." And it's like, no, you definitely are wasting a year. You can get drunk with other 18-year-olds or 19-year-olds if that's your goal, and you can do that without paying 10 grand worth of tuition and another 10 grand to live in residence. Again, I think when you start looking at credentials and you start looking at non-traditional post-secondary in terms of college should not be looked at as like a second-class option. It shouldn't be looked at as anything less than university. The skill sets are equivalent. Reading and writing versus the guys that are welding and building or cooking or whatever the case may be. I fully believe those are equivalent skill sets, and maybe that just comes from being a sort of a high school teacher that sees everyone has different strengths in different areas. But I think that sort of funneling absolutely everyone in to university as the sort of catch-all, all it's doing is frustrating parents, students, and teachers, because university profs are frustrated that these kids aren't motivated coming in. The kids are frustrated because they don't really want to be there, and they, in many cases, aren't equipped to succeed. And parents are upset because they're paying for little Johnny or Jane's education out the nose, and yet they're not succeeding in any way, shape, or form. And even when they do succeed, they're getting A's, and they get their credential. And I put that together for a presentation that I delivered to some students at a conference last year, and that got a bit of a pop from the audience, and I'm quite certain many of their parents would have had some select words for me at that point. But you know what? I've seen it. I've saw it countless times now. I lived in residence for 4 years at the University of Manitoba. And then obviously now as a high school teacher, I keep in touch with many of my former students, and I see it year in and year out. People that take these degrees and they're like, "Oh, I'm really interested in, to have a couple of my in first year economics or the fall of the Roman Empire," and those are great things. But here's the thing: library passes cost $10, and you can go online these days and take free first year courses from Ivy League schools. So if you just want to explore your interests, explore them for free, and then pay for a credential that will allow you to earn a career or live a lifestyle that you want. And if you want more info on that, I've got a lot of math behind what I'm saying. I'm not just totally shooting from the hip here, because believe me, I've had to defend myself to many a parent who've come for my skin. And so you can check that out. It's the last chapter in More Money for Beer and Textbooks, and it's got some sort of eye-opening stats about the current Canadian market and the current employment rates of many students that are graduating with these degrees. I got one quick story in regards to to post-secondary education. I walked into my staff room one day, and there was a sort of magazine, a thick magazine. It looked like a very well put together publication, and it was open, and it had all the statistics. It was put out by a post-secondary institution. It had all the statistics on their various programs and how long it took students, what jobs they typically got after. And what caught my eye was they had quite a high response rate. Over 80% of their grads responded to this survey, and it talked about what what their level of employability was within the field that they had got education for, because that's often not the case, as my Starbucks photo here will tell you. And it also talked about their wage. And it just so happened that the one thing that was open, I saw that it had a 100% employment rate within the field, and they were earning on average $85,000. And I thought, that's impossible. How can this be? It was a small class, inevitably, 55 students. And then I finally tracked my way back to the beginning of the article, and it was for a train conductor. And I had never seriously thought, perhaps when I was 3 years old and got a train set, but other than that, I had never seriously thought about being a train conductor or recommending becoming a train conductor before. And admittedly, there's some cons to that job, like you're sort of all over the map, and I'm assuming that you don't have a lot of down leisure time in urban centers and stuff, but just the idea that there's a program that was 6 months with virtually guaranteed employment and an $85,000 average earnings a few years out of the post-secondary institution, that was amazing to me. And the fact that I can't remember a single teacher ever recommending that to a single student ever, because we're too busy recommending university at all costs. So that's my spiel on that. If you want to build wealth young, I think it's something to think about. If you're looking at going back to school for a second go-around, perhaps you might want to change up the approach this time from something that you just liked reading about to something that you like doing, but you can also make some money at. So investing, the part of the presentation that probably Canadian Moneysaver readers were sort of most waiting for. And I'm quite sorry to disappoint you. I'm very, very vanilla and bland when it comes to investing. I'm straight up one of these couch potato devotees. My problem is that I read too much, and that stops me from going with my gut, because the math is in, and study after study I've read, whether it's American, Canadian, it shows that we're just really bad stock pickers. Oftentimes we get like less than half the market return. We're even bad at staying in funds. If we're actively managing funds, we're bad at determining when to get in and out of the fund. So Vanguard, which is sort of a monster index investment, a monster in the index investment field, they do all these studies and they show how most investors they don't even get the average of the return of the fund they're in, and you think, how is that possible? They just have to stay in the fund, and we don't. It's over and over again. I'm sure most of you out there have heard the studies on this. We're just not very good at buying low and selling high. It doesn't matter sort of how many Gordon Gekko shows we watch. We're still just biologically wired to do the opposite. We're biologically wired to go with the herd, and I really think it's sort of interesting. David Chilton wrote in one of his, I forget which Wealthy Barber book it was, either the recent version or the original, but he said that one of the key things that he looks for when the market must be about to drop, his best indicator is not a stock market chart or some fundamentals or whatever voodoo the latest sort of financial news network is pitching. It's just when teachers started coming to him talking about borrowing to invest, he knew the market was going to be oversaturated soon. Because teachers were like conservative on average, we don't really know a lot about investing in my experience. And so when sort of that investing fever had gotten to its climax, that was when you had even conservative professionals like teachers that were talking about borrowing to invest. And that was a great indicator that the market was overvalued. And I think maybe that has influenced me. Michael Lewis, who's one of my favorite financial authors, and he's worked in all these different things, he has talked several times about how he only invests in index funds, and I figure if this is a guy who knows pretty much all the insiders on Wall Street and Bay Street, and he thinks that whether the game is rigged or not is sort of irrelevant, I just want to get the average. I know I can meet my life's goals with the average. I don't believe that I can put in enough research time I think there is something to value investing. I think that if you're willing to, pick through the carcasses of financial statements for small companies that aren't on the TSX 60 and aren't on the S&P 500, that don't have a ton of volume trading and don't get a lot of media attention, I think if you're willing to do that, I think there's opportunities in the small and mid cap sort of investment fields. I know that at this point in my life, I don't have the time to get into those sort of market inefficiencies and sort of work them to my advantage. Maybe I would say less than 5% of Canadians do. So yeah, I've got an ebook out there on using a discount brokerage and just buying absolutely the lowest cost ETFs in Canada. Basic rebalancing, all that vanilla stuff you can find in almost any issue of Canadian Moneysaver. So I won't go into too much more on that, just because, yeah, it is what it is. That's my philosophical belief. I just don't think I can beat experts who work for hedge funds that, they were working for NASA, but now they're working for hedge funds, and they've invented algorithms that can trade in, 0.001 of a millisecond. And, these guys are geniuses with supercomputers that should be working for space companies, and I just don't think I can beat them on the other end of a trade. So it's pretty much that simple for me. So how then? How do you? Okay, so I've sold you on the couch potato investing, or I haven't at this point. There's not much else I can say. And so how do we do this? How do we get this index-based stuff? And a great book, and I've got my most recent podcast was with the author. It's called The Value of Simple, and it's by Dr. John Robertson. And he looks at what is sort of the best way to get exposure to these passive investing options. And I really like how he details that it's all about trade-offs, right? Discount brokerage, investing in ETFs, that's the best. You're going to cut everything to the absolute minimum. If you use the discount brokerage I recommend, which I won't go into detail on this webinar, you can go to my site and find that out. If you go there, you can buy ETFs for free, and you're simply not gonna find a better deal in personal finance investing right now, in my opinion. But that requires you to do some legwork. It requires you to do some paperwork. It requires you, if you're investing outside of a registered account, which again, most Canadians have plenty of room in their registered account. I know I have not invested outside my registered accounts yet. So if you're gonna just not do anything simply because if you're not going to do anything simply because you're waiting for the magical ETF option, then do something else. And TDE series, another solid option. Again, I'm sure if you've read financial blogs or you've read Canadian Moneysaver, you know about TDE series. Once you get it set up, it's super easy. There's sort of the upfront rates. There's obviously no fees to trade on there, as it's a mutual fund. That's a great option, but again, you're looking at a few headaches getting that set up. So then you have this new movement, and Tangerine is the one that Mr. Robertson discusses in his book. But now we're seeing this light advice movement, and you're seeing things like Portfolio IQ come out. You're seeing things like Wealth Simple come out, and these sort of robo-advisors, and I like the term light advice better. I think robo-advisors is like someone in the mutual fund community is like pushing the media to call them robo-advisors. And anyhow, basically, I think those are solid options if the other option's doing nothing. They're going to take, somewhere between 0.5 and 0.1% off of you to put you into a predefined sort of risk-evaluated portfolio that has, this very same index ETFs that I'm invested in away from that. If they're doing it properly, that's what your investment is ultimately invested in. And I think for young people, they've got a lot of sort of commission breaks for young people or people with low net worths. And I think it's one of the best ways to get started with investing right now. Again, if you don't mind putting in a little bit of legwork, you don't mind reading sort of The Millionaire Teacher and maybe a couple other books, then discount brokerages and ETFs, that's your best. You want to cut fees to the bone, that's going to give you your best. You want simplicity and you just want to get this started, and you're one of these people that just doesn't want to worry about money stuff, but eventually you want to retire at some point, than the light advice movement or the stuff that like Tangerine's turnkey portfolios are offering. That's a pretty good bet, I think. I had a quick question, and it was in regards to my investing. Is Calvin again? He said, how would you contrast your approach with the Beat the TSX or Dogs of the Dow strategies? And I'm familiar with that, obviously, as a Canadian Moneysaver fan, and I recognize the value of value investing. That being said, here's my thoughts on it, Calvin. If those strategies have worked in the past, if enough smart people believe in those strategies going forward, and by smart people, I'm sort of lumping in people that run huge pension funds and hedge funds and stuff. I'm sort of putting them all in there. If I lump all those people together and they believe it's a good strategy too, then inevitably that's going to bring the strategy right back to the market average. It's going to revert right back to the mean, because there's a ton of people that get paid millions of dollars to look for the best strategies every year. And I mean, the Dogs of the Dow is no secret. It's been out there for a little while. But any real winning formula or algorithm that's out there is going to have a short shelf life. And I just don't think I'm quick enough to stick with it. Again, I know I'm not the smartest guy in the room, that perhaps there are people that, like I said, can look for value and can, see whether it's dividend investing or value investing or whatever the case may be. They can sort of see that. But I'm satisfied with the returns I'm going to get from a portfolio that has some exposure to the Canadian market, the American market, and the international market. And I'm going to reach I know that if I can continue my savings rates, I'm going to reach my goals using that approach, so I don't need to take a risk on sort of the trading fees and everything else associated with those. But I'm not saying that there's not a lot of math behind what they're doing and that they haven't beaten sort of the index in the past, because I know they have. We got to quickly move along here because I want to get everyone out early tonight, because I'm used to being a high school teacher and I always get a big round of applause when I do that. So we'll continue on here. So if I retire early, won't I run out of money? And there's a really chilling story, and I believe it was the National Post today about this. And first off, I think I need to admit again, before everyone jumps on me, that having a defined benefit pension plan obviously helps, or a defined contribution plan obviously helps as well. But a defined benefit plan, it's the Cadillac thing for a reason. It really sort of helps if you're going to retire early, because you don't have that downside risk of outliving your savings. So for me, and so obviously I'm not an expert in this area, with both my fiance and I both having defined benefit plans, my planning is a little bit more straightforward. That being said, I think a lot of people overestimate the cost of living, and sort of what all the positive changes that you can make to your life once you're retired, if you really choose. There's a guy who's got a bit of a cult following in the U.S. called Mr. Money Mustache, and he's become like legendary for all these frugal hacks that he does, and he has learned how to change his own brakes on his car and all these things that he has time to do. And you can travel at non-peak times if you want to travel, and you can look for different deals. You just have all this time and energy that I know I don't have at the end of the day. I'm not able to put in as much time as I'd like to when it comes to saving and looking at investments and planning, sort of looking for coupons and just looking for the best deals and comparison shopping. I'm not able to do all that. There's just not enough hours in a day, and I can't imagine. I don't even have children, so I can't imagine if I had 3 kids running around how little time I'd have for all that. Now you retire, I think you have a lot more time than a person realizes to look into that, whether it's even something like negotiating a car or calling up your Sirius satellite radio and trying to negotiate a better deal with them, or your communications provider. You can do all these little things. It doesn't matter as much if you got to sit on the phone for a half hour. Just pull up your favorite novel and sit on the phone for a half hour and wait till the manager gives you 30% off. So I think that in my idea of early retirement, which I can't say is completely realistic given that I'm not currently early retired, but my idea and the back and forth I've had with people that are early retired is that you can save a lot more money than most people think in early retirement. Even just your travel expenses to and from work every day, especially if you're a commuter, those are gone. So it certainly is reality, and I would say try your best to plan for it. But here's my other caveat. If your worst fear in life is that you're going to run out of money in your retirement, then your life's pretty good, realistically. If you still have your health at 95, and you still have all these, there's many other worst case scenarios that scare me a lot more than running out of money does. And perhaps I'm naive about that. I certainly have been called worse than that in the past, but I'm not trying to make light of the problem, but I think that if you're going to live in fear of that, you're perhaps going to sacrifice a lot of things in life. So we don't have much time for questions here, and I've sort of been trying to keep up as we go, and I promised I'd let you guys out early. The good news I have to deliver for you is everyone that's not already reading Canadian Moneysaver, you can totally read Canadian Moneysaver for free right now. Just head over to the website, log in, use the code STU, and you can read the online subscription totally for free. You're going to get access to authors much smarter than myself, and occasionally myself, once in a blue moon. You can compare my really lame, vanilla, couch potato investing to all these sexy ideas that are going to let you beat the market and become rich far quicker. As well as just a wealth of advice on everything from tax loss harvesting to how to live a little more frugally if that's your thing, or plan for your successors and everything else in between. So if you're viewing this coming over from my Young and Thrifty blog and some of the other stuff I do, and you're not already subscribed to Canadian Moneysaver, check it out, STU. You're going to get it to read it for free. And that's it, guys. Hopefully it wasn't a complete waste of an hour for you, and hopefully I didn't make you too mad with some of my shots at owning a house and going to university. That's all I got, and thanks once again to Canadian Moneysaver for letting me do this. And hopefully we'll talk to you all soon. Remember, you can check me out at youngandthrifty.ca, myuniversitymoney.com, and the More Money for Beer and Textbooks podcast, where I always sign out the following: more beers, more cheers. That's it. That's all, guys. Have a nice night.